Greetings, I'm Ruben Martinez, and I want to welcome you to another forum of FutureU, which focuses on neoliberalism and higher education. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, Frank and I, and we decided that today we would have basically a conversation with colleagues who have participated and also try to do this as an interviewed format. So with me is, of course, Frank Fear, who is Professor Emeritus at Michigan State University. He's also a sociologist like me, and he is interested in public and nonprofit institutions, notably in higher education. Also with us is Adrian Lenardic, who is a professor of Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Science at Rice University, currently hanging out over in the San Francisco area. He is originally from Croatia, and has been with us in previous forums and also submitted a couple or maybe three commentaries, very insightful ones that have received a lot of attention. And so he's going to join us in the conversation. And also with us is Joseph Juhas, who is also a retired professor from the University of Colorado and University of Colorado at Denver. He is Professor Emeritus of Architecture and Environmental Design in the College of Architecture and Planning. He is the author and co-author of several professional articles and so forth. But he is originally from Hungary and is a survivor of the Holocaust, was a refugee from there, immigrated to the United States in 1951, and continues to reside in Boulder, Colorado. So welcome, my colleagues. I do want to speak a little bit about the uh, purpose of FutureU Forum. It's a spin-off from the conference that I organized with some colleagues back in 2014, in the spring of 2014, to focus on neoliberalism in higher education. Why was I interested in that? Well, when I started in 1984, the chair of my department was greatly concerned about students being customers, or that language that was floating around at that time. And though I was a early non-tenured faculty member at the time, I spent the rest of my 6, 7 years getting tenured, promoted, and all of that stuff. But I never lost that notion of students as customers. In 1991, I entered the administrative ranks and stayed in various roles until 2022. And throughout that period, especially during the early part, as an administrator, I had to handle a great number of budget cuts. The universities were being cut back from state funding and so on. And so just kind of an endless process of budget cutting. And I recall that, and it made me think more about what exactly was going on. This was the time of globalization, the New World Order, and all of that kind of language. And it just kind of seemed at the time that we were kind of evolving, society was evolving into a new order. That's how it felt like, but at a global level, and that there was very little or nothing that we could do about it. It kind of consumed us in terms of just the magnitude of change that was taking place. But looking back on it, I mean, it was all policy driven. It was not, society evolving on its own, but it was all policy driven. And I think it was Margaret Thatcher who told us that we could do nothing about it because there was no alternative to what was going on. But in fact, there is an alternative. And so what we find here today is, sort of the apex of that movement that was taking hold. We decided in 2014 to continue to address these issues following the conference. And we had not only the FutureU Forum as a spin-off, but in 2021, we also published a special issue of the Social Justice Journal, uh, including some of the work by participants at the conference. The conference itself included scholars from the West Coast, from the Midwest, from the Southwest, from the East Coast, and several from Canada. It was very well attended. We had administrators and a lot of the people at the conference presented their research on what was going on. The reason I was pushing for that is because I really wanted to understand what was going on. My work had been focused on minorities, and from a perspective of conducting research from a framework of positionality, I tended to look out upon the larger social order from the location of minorities so I could reveal the structure of power. And as I continued to do that, I decided that neoliberalism had taken hold, and that because there was very little discussion among faculty about it, basically what had taken place is the order, the new order had us with our noses to the grindstone so closely we couldn't see the larger picture. And so I decided that it was important to have that broader conversation. And then Bani Bukaru, who was a colleague from the College of Communications and a greatly competent technician with technology, pushed us to continue those conversations and to move it to Zoom, which we did. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2015, and I'm very grateful that Frank Fear, my colleague, stepped up to handle the technological aspects of the endeavor, and he and I have been working together ever since. So the purpose of the forum really is to get people to engage in dialogue, thoughtful dialogue about neoliberalism and higher education. Of course, noting that neoliberalism is a broad social movement, and that higher education really is the recipient of some of the changes ushered in by the larger movement. In other words, on the receiving end of it. So with that, I'd like to turn to my colleague Frank Fear and have him tell us, or tell you rather, uh, why he became involved in this endeavor. Frank?
Thank you, Ruben. Certainly, I want to say thank you emphatically for your leadership. When you think about any endeavor, we're now into over 10 years. That's fairly significant. Uh, I was a professor emeritus at the time, retired from Michigan State University full-time service in the middle of 2012. And my career at Michigan State, which spanned almost 40 years, was really what I would call a combo uh, set of responsibilities. And yet, I always viewed myself as a faculty member who happened to be an administrator when I was an administrator, and went back and forth later in my career from full-time faculty work to full-time administrative work, and had an opportunity, very thankful for the opportunities to work in a number of large scale initiatives at Michigan State, both at the university level as well as at the college level, and have responsibility for administrative roles at a variety of levels from undergraduate student programs to extension outreach engagement programs to research programs, as well as continuing the academic work. Uh, as background, my field is community and organization development, and I don't want to give the impression that at the time I was a student or a scholar of what we now call neoliberalism and has been called neoliberalism. I was a person who was essentially a working stiff who noticed over time that the culture had changed. It had changed in ways that were, as I look back now, quite stunning because, as we all are, at least I hope we all are, we are mentored by senior colleagues who not only help us learn the ropes, but also to understand what the obligations are as both a faculty member and also as an administrator. And having come from that mentoring, the mentorship that they offered, I began to see a shift. And so what it did, and that drew me to you, to Ruben. What it did is it drew me to say, well, there has to be literature on this, and there has to be a name for it. And as I began to delve into it, I realized that a significant number of colleagues were writing and discussing what we now call neoliberalism, and that at Michigan State, Ruben was one of those colleagues. And when I learned about the conference, I was in Florida at the time, And I asked Ruben if it'd be possible to come to the conference, and he said certainly. And so I was one of the presenters at the conference, and as Ruben mentioned, it evolved to the point now that I'm the managing editor of our website, FutureU, conversations about values and change in higher education. And we do our best to post something relevant with respect to neoliberalism and how it has evolved and morphed over time. So we post something every day. Plus, we have a YouTube channel. This video will go on our new YouTube channel that at this point probably has 25 to 30 different videos. And as Ruben mentioned, Adrian is part of that series. And so what I didn't expect, but it's our reality, is as things have evolved, from my perspective, they've gotten worse. And I just got through writing a piece that looks at change in higher education, and the beginning of the piece is really about the evolution that was rendered by internal efforts to change. But as I think we all realize, in a very fundamental way, is that the threat of change, and it is a threat, is coming from the outside. And so, in very, very profound ways, to the point that uh, it makes headlines every day, both in terms of what the current administrative regime is seeking to impose on higher education, seeking to align it to its priorities. For example, with respect to the recent initiative, um, no more than 15% of your student body can be international students, et cetera, et cetera. And so the relevance, I think, of the work we're involved in, rather than waning, has deepened from primary concern about the neoliberal incursion on higher education, largely from within, administratively, aided and abetted by governance officials. But now it's primarily from the outside. And how can higher education protect itself as it seeks to continue to endorse historic values and approaches, when in fact, really for the first time in my career, uh, the external pressure is to change it so that higher education becomes a delivery system for an ideological stance. That just was so far away from what drew me to the academy and my experience most of my time in the academy. So that's why it's a blessing for me to be involved in this work and can continue to be involved.
Thank you, Frank. So, as you can tell, our dear listeners, we have decided to celebrate a decade of our work. And so today's title is A Decade of Discussion in Neoliberalism in Higher Education. At this point, I'd like to invite Adrian to tell us what attracted him to this conversation, and then we'll turn it over to Professor Juhas to begin his interview.
Thanks, Ruben. I think one of the perspectives I can add is somebody who came in, I guess, from the outside. And this was after you had put up your YouTubes, you had put up your websites and things like that. So I started as a faculty member in 2000, probably around 2010, I started to notice a shift. The one Frank mentioned, certainly. Something Ruben said resonates with me. Before that, like any professor who's untenured, yeah, my nose was down, so I wasn't really looking around. I couldn't really see the things going on. Once I started noticing the shift, and honestly, when I actually had the time to really think about this, was in the before times, so 2020, when all of us had more time to think about things than we might have wanted to. I actually started looking around, and some of the things Frank said, the advice I had gotten from my mentors about what the academy was and what brought me into the academy had changed completely. And part of this was noticing a large administrative bloat while budgets were being cut and wondering what's going on. One of the things I found really useful for me with FutureU is I had this sense, and I think many of my colleagues do, of wondering, am I the only one seeing this, right? What is actually going on? And searching for a name for it. led me to do the research Frank did, and that's how I found you guys and started, kind of contributing, doing my thing. I think one of the other perspectives I can add, something I did notice was that there was this thought, and whether it's propagated or not, that all of this complaining, if you like, about neoliberalism, or if you like, an economic view of how universities should run, that they should be efficient, cost-cutting, business-like, was only affecting the humanities and the social sciences. And as somebody in the natural sciences, I found that to be objectionable and certainly not correct. It is having an effect on the way natural sciences are done, the way sciences are done, and really on the whole idea of what we used to call public knowledge, that now everything has become privatized, connections to corporations within universities for research, the things I do, really started to worry me. And that's one of the other perspectives that drew me into this, that I could actually contribute in some sense from the natural sciences as well. One of my other interests is thinking about how systems work, and that includes economic systems and the university system. So that combination of things drew me. In terms of the effectiveness, yeah, it was very effective. You guys provided a great source of literature, a way in. To echo something Frank said, and maybe this is something you guys want to think about moving to the next 10 years, I still think, even though, for me it's been 5 years, there is an awareness that is still missing, and it's an awareness internally. A lot of my colleagues within the university still aren't really able to articulate what's going on. They sense it, but they're not aware. And part of that is actually getting the information out there. And I think that's something great that you all are doing, and hopefully it can continue onward.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you for joining us 5 years ago. We really appreciate it. You brought in the perspective of the natural scientists, and we have also had philosophers and people from education and a lot of other disciplines. But for a long time, it was basically just the humanities and the social sciences that were having this conversation. So hopefully, we've kind of broadened that conversation and looking forward to having, as you say, more and more colleagues becoming aware of what is going on. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our guest, Professor Juhas, who will take over from here and conduct a series of interviews with each of us, or all of us. Joseph?
Well, thank you very much, Ruben, and very happy to meet you all. Adrian, are you fished out of the Adriatic Sea or just next to it?
I am actually, the direct translation is Adriatic.
Well,
So
that's
when
why
my
I'm saying it.
yeah, it's actually Jadranko Leonardich. So when my mom came here and I was 6 years old, she thought I might get teased a little bit with the name Adriatic, so it became Adrian.
There you go. We're neighbors.
Yeah, it's like John in Croatian. It's the most common name.
So let me say that it seems to me that 10 years ago would be roughly a year and a half before the beginning of Trump's first term. So let me just ask, during those years, the run up to his first term, and now in the in between 4 years of Mr. Biden, and now back to Mr. Trump, what changes do you see coming from the federal government that has an effect of contributing to the business transformation of higher education from education to business? Let's begin with Ruben and then continue counterclockwise.
Thank you for the question, Joe. What I have seen is that neoliberalism is a social movement, particularly as we were getting close to 2016, 2018, and so on, is that it had neoliberalism had engendered a space for a lot of other social movements to begin taking hold. One of them, of course, has been the militia. We've had the Christian nationalists come up. We have had the neoliberal libertarians, out there, and we've had the white supremacist movements all come together and be part of the neoliberal coalition that Trump brought together. And so that began to have some radical changes in terms of what neoliberalism started out as. So one of the things that I've emphasized when I look at neoliberalism is radical individualism, and that was, part of higher education becoming a private good rather than a um, social good, and that's why the states began to, defund really higher education, passing on all the costs to the parents. But another component of it is small government, which, when this broader coalition began to take hold, actually morphed into anti-government. So we're now in this moment where a lot of the followers of Trump really are anti-government. And so what we're seeing is the decimation of the federal government in practically all the different sectors of the government. So, to a great extent, what has happened is that the movement has lost its own control and become part of a broader populist movement that has a lot of fascist tendencies because of the different threads of the movement and the coalition. And so what we're seeing really is the movement toward autocracy, and part of that is to control. There's autocrats always wanting to control the media, always wanting to control the public discourse, silencing critics and so forth. And as we've seen in the past, some of the earliest ones that are to be taken out are the intellectuals, because they tend to talk back. And so what we're seeing then is this movement toward, uh, limiting higher education in terms of what they call, ideological socialization and brainwashing of students and so forth. But it's basically all a ruse. The other thing is that there's this emphasis, particularly I think from that report that came out back in I think '83, A Nation at Risk, which pushed basically argued that our American schools were not teaching the students. And, more recently, we found out that they're really not really effective at teaching our students. But what has gone on is that there's this trend to try to convert our universities into trade schools to make sure that, we're a pipeline to jobs and not a pipeline to intellectuals and scientific research and all of those kinds of things.
French government under Vichy, which says famille, travail, patrie. And to me, that is the beginnings of neoliberalism.
The journey I've taken over the last, say, 25 years is not something, I mean, I could look back now and it makes sense, but as you're traveling it, you have no idea where it's going to lead, obviously. But when I was an administrator at Michigan State, of course, we had the Hatch Act, and so it was not possible to really speak out or take any stand that was political. And yet, when I look back now, the stand I took, was really very political. But it was through the work that I did as a faculty member. I always used to refer to myself and others as scholar practitioners or scholar activists, which means that in the decision what we would study, how we would study it, with whom we would study, a lot of it evolved into really more collaborative work where those we were working with weren't just beneficiaries, they were partners in both knowledge generation and also then the application of knowledge that hopefully would lead to the outcome of the public good. Um, and what's interesting, if I lay over that my own, with a capital P, politics, This will get us into neoliberalism. At one time, I was actually sort of a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party. But one of the things that I would say in that regard is, and it was drilled into me in graduate school, is that any paradigm will fight like hell to maintain itself, and that expect paradigms to morph by being able to incorporate within it ideas that allows it to continue. And so what I began to see starting in the 90s and then picking up steam on the Democratic side was what we now know and is written about called progressive neoliberalism, which is very much a Reagan Thatcher style approach to the economy, but very much progressive on the social side. And I don't have to go into details on that when you think of some of the things that Bill Clinton did, President Clinton, and a whole lot of things that happened when Barack Obama was president and continued with Biden. But but what we're dealing with now, and it gets me to the threshold of the Trump era, uh, I never expected to experience what we're experiencing now. I became very politically active as soon as I retired, and became was is and still am an activist and engaged in community groups. I never expected neoliberalism to take another morph, which is neoliberal fascism, where just about everything that I'm viewing from the current regime combines uh, money as power, as a cudgel, with using authoritative means. When you think about it, it reminds me very much of the mafioso, where you have an opportunity here, or else you will do as we say, or you will be rewarded if you participate and if you collaborate with us. That may be going too far. At least say yes to us. And if you don't, though, you will be punished. And it's always in the form of lower research grants, penalties of other sort that you can measure in terms of money. And you think about the architecture within which this is all happening, with this crypto empire that the president and his family is establishing. And so I think, and this goes back to what I said earlier in my introduction, for the first time in my career, I was involved in a number of national movements, two specifically, where I was very active and had let's say, a national name. Those were internal to higher education. Now we're fighting for our survival to retain what I would say a traditional ethos of higher education because of this neoliberal fascism, where it's all about the money and it's all about imposed priorities so that the work that you do as an institution fits our priorities. And if it doesn't, we will punish you to the point of threatening your very survival.
My initial, kind of worries were the ones that Ruben started with, this idea of a student as customer from the university standpoint. So the fact that everything was starting to be seen under an economic lens. And to me, neoliberalism was kind of the end game of that. It wasn't the only one. I mean, we can't let Democrats completely off the hook, like Frank said. Clinton, others had started to take a economic view of everything, that everything runs like a business. And once that moved into what used to be called public goods, that kind of set off my worry from the university standpoint. And when I saw this kind of move, I thought initially, well, this is mostly economics, but it's kind of naive to say you can separate economics from politics, and I've realized you can't. I will echo what Frank said. The degree to which they came together is now somewhat surprising, but I guess in retrospect, if I look back on it, it's maybe not so surprising. So what I started to see at universities was kind of this push of telling students, right, that the be all and end all is not just to get a job that you enjoy, but to get a high paying job, that became success in life. The word entrepreneur started permeating my university to a ridiculous degree that everybody had to be an entrepreneur of the self. Success was redefined, and the idea of what is public value, public good seemed to disappear. Now, looking at this through the neoliberal lens, if you start to say there is no such thing as society, Well, it's a short step to saying there is no such thing as the public good. There's just individuals fighting it out. The market is the decider of all. It's the arbitrator. It tells you what is good and what is not. My thinking is the original people who started thinking about neoliberalism probably didn't see the fascist neoliberalism coming. And I think it's overly reductive to say, neoliberalism is what really caused democracy to go downhill, but it sure contributed, right? Once you actually go into this mode of pure economic thought, and you're applying it everywhere, everywhere. I mean, from hospitals to higher education, you're kind of wiping out the idea of equality, which, democracy, political equality, one vote, everybody has a say, all this. And you kind of set yourself up to say, okay, well, from the business view, I mean, it's winners and losers. People who stand in your way are the competition. And you've opened the door. You've completely opened the door. And then you do start to have a societal effect. And again, I'll echo Frank, I don't think the original originators in the 30s of neoliberalism really wanted that, but the door was completely open. And that, to me, is what I'm kind of struggling with now, seeing it happen. The other thing I'm struggling with is seeing that I can only speak to my own university. A lot of universities seem to be doubling down on the student as customer model, not seeing what it's doing to the long-term value of democracy itself. It's almost like hiding your head in the sand, which again is one of the reasons I think, university FutureU coming out is a great thing, just to get people aware that this idea of what's become known as TINA, right? There is no alternative, is not correct, right? That you have to actually see there's another way of doing it. And it's also a long game that I think universities are starting to miss, right? That we're the ones who educate the future generations. If the future generations are told, right, that you have to take an entrepreneurial view, then right, they're gonna succumb to these very extreme kind of right-wing views, which are kind of couched around you will have success. There is no public, there is no public value, there is no public good. For me, also on the natural sciences side, now every grant has to be connected to something that's patentable. The idea that actually you can put out information that can be used by the public now is not of value, that students are being conditioned to the fact that they have to team up with startups, and that's the way to help the good. I just don't see that as correct. The other thing that worries me is that we fall into this trap of either or, that it's one way or the other. Business models are great for business, they're great for corporation, but that doesn't mean they're great for universities and certainly not great for governments. So, right in 2016, Jared Kushner said the government should run as an American corporation. And if one steps back and says, wait a minute, right? Are citizens the customers or are they actually the boss? You've kind of subverted this whole thing. And I see that in microcosm happening at the universities when they actually adopt this neoliberalist view. And that to me is certainly a worry. So I guess at the end of the day, I can say to your question, neoliberalism, I mean, that economic view, it opened the door for what we're seeing happening politically. And the idea that it was a moral free it's not correct, right? And we're getting what, the slow train wreck, I think that Rubin and Frank saw coming in 2015. It's here.
I see Ruben Martinez raising his hands, so I recognize you, sir.
Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate what Frank has said, particularly about the mafioso way of doing business, basically through threat and extortion, uh, and also what Adrian has said. Uh, in terms of how we've gotten to this coalition, radical coalition of right-wing populism, I think we need to remember that neoliberalism peddled globalization. And in the 80s, we had that runaway plant phenomenon. By the 90s, everything that we was purchasing was made abroad. being brought in from someplace else. And that hollowed out the middle class here, hollowed out the manufacturing workers. And, that had come on the heels of the civil rights movement, which I think had disillusioned white Americans, particularly working Americans who were being losing their jobs and so forth, about their status in this society, the demographic shift that is taking place with whites not having any natural growth. So we're important South Africans. And now we have all of these things coming together really in a period of tremendous inequality that neoliberalism ushered in, that gives us really the kind of crazy moment in history that we actually are in now, where people, Americans, are, particularly white Americans, are willing to accept authoritarianism if they can recover their what they believe to be the rightful status in society. What I argue is that there's a large segment, and I don't want to say that all white Americans are taking that position, but there's a large number of them who are also recognizing that it is important to restore democracy, to defend democracy, and to stand up. And I'm really proud of all of those who are out in the public spaces protesting what is going on, because ultimately Americans are the last defense of democracy as we stand today.
Let me go back to something that Frank said that really struck a chord with me, and see if you guys are in accord and want to speak to that. Frank made a overgeneralization, which, although it is an overgeneralization, is at the heart of it, I believe, entirely correct, though it's debatable. Namely, that the opposition to the Biden government violently disagrees with its social policies, but doesn't really offer an alternative to his economic policies. It maybe complains about them, but doesn't offer or hasn't offered an alternative. And I think that reality affects the commercialization, the continuing commercialization of higher education, is that we don't really have, other than on the social sphere, which I don't want to make light of, it's tremendously important, but still the basic notion of basically these guys are customers, period, and that there's a certain economic reality behind that, seems continuous during the past 10 years, and obviously accelerating in the last year and a half. So I'd really love to hear more thoughts about that, if we could.
Yeah, I do want to follow up on something you said in terms of the economic realities. So it's been an economic reality since university and colleges were university and colleges that students do want to get jobs. I think we all agree with that. We have no problems with that. The problem is, again, when you are willing to get yourself painted into an either or corner, that if you don't actually get students to get a job, then you're failing. If you actually incorporate some idea that the university can serve two purposes, that it actually can provide vocational training and can also provide its historical value, which is actually to have students educated more broadly for things that allow them to step into the world. And since we're talking politics, to actually step into the world as citizens, right? The idea of liberal arts, liberal free arts skill, was actually that you're training a free citizen who can actually evaluate things beyond just their own vocation. From the standpoint of the student as customer model, this is also the either or. I don't think this should be a right or left. If you lean toward vocational training, you should be as upset by this as anybody else. My family came to the States in the auto body business, and when my grandfather trained me to do auto body, he had no thinking in his mind that I was a customer. That would be silly, right? That's not how education works. It's simply not. So that, right, is not ignoring the economic reality. No, it's actually acknowledging it 100%, right? And this is again part of the either or, that the university has to run like a business. Not everything has to run like a business. So do we abandon the idea that a part of education goes beyond vocational training, that it's actually to train citizens? And it doesn't matter if you're left or right, right? Do you want your child to be trained to actually be able to contribute to the politics, if you like, to society, if you like? Do you want them to have that broader view, or are you just interested in them becoming a CEO? That's the economic side I think some of us have a problem with. We certainly acknowledge parents saying, hey, I want my kid to have a good job. Your tuition is going up. Why is that? Well, with that, that's also the part of the university becoming a business, right? My university now has 14 vice presidents. They all make about 400K a year, right? Tuition continues to go up. A lot of what they're serving is no longer education. I think having this kind of whitewashed away and painted into an overly political mode is also a little damaging, right? I have right-wing parent friends who are also upset about this, right? That's a practicality. And I guess that was my kind of answer to your economic little query there. And I think it is reasonable, and I think it is something we have to address, right? That there is this reality. There are parents and students who do want this from the school, but the question is, right, does it really have to be one or the other? And it doesn't. And if you push it toward the one vocational, right, then students are nothing more than human capital. You're just training them in a pipeline to go down to the business. But the businesses would never accept what should be inevitable. If that's the case, they should be paying for the tuition, not the parents. They won't accept that, right? And that's also part of what Frank was saying. There's a lot of corporate capture happening at universities now, right? Deloitte interviews at my university, all these places interview at my university. The university as a place of actual freedom is what's being subverted, right? And I got it. A corporation is not a place of freedom. Do we want the university to maintain that? And I don't want to be overly hyperbolic, but it could be one of the last bastions that could do that.
Okay, Ruben, it's your turn.
Well, I appreciate the comments made by all of my colleagues here. There's a couple of things we need to acknowledge. One, that neoliberalism is highly embedded in our institutions today, but it is also highly embedded ideologically in the minds of Americans. They think like this now because we're now in the third generation of kids who have been raised under this model. And when I give presentations, guest presentations to students, some of them come up afterwards and say, "I didn't realize I'm a neoliberal, that I was I'm thinking in neoliberal terms." Um, but in terms of the opposition to Biden, one of the approaches of the transformation of the social order by neoliberalism has been disruption. I'm glad Frank mentioned that. In fact, it's the lexicon, it's entered the lexicon so much that the Nobel Prize in economics went to a person who has written about creative disruption in technology, right? You disrupt the economy technologically, but what are you going to do with the people that you're displacing, right? These are questions that we have to address societally, society-wise, because you can't just have technology, especially now with AI, doing everything for us. There'll be no workers in the warehouses anymore because robots are, sending you your stuff and so on. We have to keep that in mind. In terms of what type of economy we need for the future, keeping the importance of the improvement of the human condition as we move forward. right? That's the baseline. Um, so, the current focus on the market is all about, as my colleagues have said, it's all about money. And what we have seen is the hollowing out of the middle class, and the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting super rich. I mean, we're getting ready to have someone become a trillionaire. That's an amazing amount of money.
Provide a picture of a better world in higher education and what we might do to get from here to there, however tiny the steps might be. And it's not a tiny step to have started this program 10 years ago, but let's see what advice you may have for me, since I've not been involved in it for 10 years, and or any of our listeners, as to constructive actions we can do rather than complain.
In terms of what we can do, at the end of the day, I'm an educator, you guys are educators, and we can educate. And part of that is an awareness, part of that is what FutureU has been doing. And I agree with Frank, it kind of comes from the inside. I don't know who had this quote, and I don't know if I have it correct, but a university teaches by what it is, right? So what the university projects outward is what people will see. We have to actually be willing to be a little bit self-critical, right? That some of the steps along the way were actually, things that we contributed to. So we can actually work to have the university be what we want it to be. I read a disturbing study, and I forget the authors, but they actually went through various liberal arts universities and they asked the people there, from the professors to the graduate students, what to you defines a liberal arts education? And depressingly, right, they had a list of 10 things that defined liberal arts, and they would have taken a correct answer if anybody answered two of those. Less than 20% of the people could actually answer that question, right? So this question of what is a university for? I think it's something we've neglected within the university system to our own regret. And that's when you have somebody coming in and saying higher education is the enemy. You can't defend what you don't know, right? So even with incoming students now, I've actually tried to tell my colleagues, just try to have a discussion with them about what they think a university is for, why they are here, what they see as liberal arts being. This might help break a left-right divide. And the left-right divide, to me, I see it in microcosm when I see neoliberalism and liberal arts, and one is seen as right, one is seen as left. They are both based on freedom, right? And it's a freedom of a different sort. It's an economic freedom, and then it's a freedom for civil activities and things like that. I think the best I can do is educate students coming in and some of my colleagues that those two do not need to be mutually exclusive. And I think that's something, within my power to do. And that's an awareness. Um, I agree with Frank, you got to do it a little bit, but also it's you guys can chime in. It's not easy. It's not easy even within the university. Part of the reason it's not easy is I think also an awareness that needs to be coming up that a lot of my faculty colleagues are simply too immersed doing other things. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? So getting that education, that's what I mean, beyond just the student level, getting it to my colleagues. And then the final one is, right, that I think parents coming in, right, I think they're not getting the clear information here, what's going on. And I think that's what Frank was saying. There is now kind of a twist. Misinformation is coming in. I think that is something we can fight against and at least say, okay, look, here's the viewpoint, here's what I see. And I 100% agree with what you're saying, right? Here we can complain about things, but at some point we forget about saying, okay, well, let's just make our case, right? Why do we value the liberal arts education? And we actually have to have a good sense of what that is before we can defend it. So those are kind of the things that, I see within my own power.
So one of the things that we've been doing really is describing the context in which we find ourselves. And your question about, what can be done, really is quite important. From my point of view, people need to understand the historical moment in which we live. They need to understand that this is not ordinary times, this is not a stable time, and that silence is not a strategy. We have to really understand what's going on, step up, and do something. So usually when there's change happening in society, there's basically, four ways that people respond. One of them is people see it and embrace it. And there are those who see it, do not embrace it, but seek to intervene and to change it or shape it. There are those who see it and do nothing. Unfortunately, we might have a lot of faculty who do that. And then the fourth one consists of those who just wonder what happened. And obviously, we want to be in the second category. That is, we know that it's happening. We want to intervene. We want to change it. So, what is happening with regard to higher education? There is an assault on academic freedom, and there is an assault on the autonomy of the university. This is very clear, and there's sort of a very heavy-handed way uh, by which that is occurring. At this point, at this historical moment, it's important that everyone who is related to the university and even the public at large need to understand that everyone must stand up and defend academic freedom and the autonomy of the university. That includes students. In the 60s, students were very active in making sure that there was more freedom. Faculty need to step up. If they can, we can move them out of that third category. Staff are very important. I know that librarians in some places are not considered faculty or they're considered staff, but I regard them as, the great defenders of academic freedom, particularly in this time of book banning and censorship and so forth. And so, that's an area that a lot of us can get behind. And then, of course, the administration has the responsibility of defending academic freedom, and some of them are. Some of them are capitulating, some of them are doing nothing, wondering, what if I sit this out and it'll just go away? I don't know what it is they're thinking. And then, of course, the trustees. One of the things that concerns me is the trustees are not stepping up. They need to step up and defend the university. Um, and at the same time, there are people who are resisting. Faculty, all of these groups have the responsibility of informing themselves of how resistance can occur. They all have to support the administration in doing something, right, in resisting. The administration needs support. Uh, One of the things that was reading about um, is that faculty are unionizing under the current threat at many universities. Faculty at Harvard have unionized. Can you imagine that? I mean, here I have been, the faculty here at MSU just got unionized, and though I am not a member of the faculty in place right now, I have attended their rallies and I have supported them, and I have tried to make it clear that I serve as a resource for them. Uh, it's important that faculty work together. I mean, the whole point of it is that there's strength in numbers, and that we need to recognize what we're up against. And we need to generate the same kind of power that we face. And one of my most recent pieces is coming out in the Journal of Academic Freedom this month, uh, focusing on neoliberal philanthropy and academic freedom. What we find there is that this movement against the university is an organized social movement. There are organizations out there that are funding it, that are, promoting propaganda. There are interlocking directorates that these organizations have. The Heritage Foundation is one of the main ones. I mean, it's the one that tossed out that report, 2025 or something like that. Uh, we're up against a very powerful movement, and we need to make sure that faculty, students, staff, administrators, everyone understands what we're up against. And, this can be done through teach-ins. Teach-ins were very, very effective back in the 60s. I don't know that we have to develop new strategies and new techniques, but, the Zoom is helping helping a lot. But they didn't have that back in the 60s. So there's a lot of technology that can be used, but people, if they understand the historical moment in which they live, And if they understand that the threat to higher education is a threat really to democracy as a whole as well. So I think that we can come together, but it's about organizing and building a collective resistance.
Well, thank you very much, Ruben. You really hit a point with me that I think is very, very significant. And let me, as an old man, reminisce nostalgically about what you call the 60s, which I count to be roughly 65 to 75, and recall Kent State, where the federal government nationalized a National Guard, or was it the governor, one or the other? And in any case, students were being shot and killed on campus. This was during the beginnings of my career as a professor. And what I did was joined a strike at my college where we were protesting the incursion into the higher education by the government in a violent manner. And the feelings in my faculty and at the faculty meeting ran so high that I was actually physically assaulted by a fellow faculty member. So there was a kind of activity and activism on campus at that time that I just don't see on the part of the students, on the part of the faculty, on the part of anybody else. My question.
But I think now, given the threat that is occurring right now, people are waking up. You know, presidents are resisting the compact. They are saying that they cannot accept it based on the attack on academic freedom. It infringes on academic freedom and the autonomy of the university. I think, you know, when there is a threat of this size, faculty will get it. I mean, because it's their material existence. That's their work employment. All of those kinds of things are under attack. So I think this is the moment when we can really work with them to engage them, to get them committed to engaging in some form of resistance. And there's a lot of different ways that they can resist.
I'm going to echo, yeah, what Ruben said, and I don't mean to be a Pollyanna about this, but yeah, 2025 has made some things very hard to ignore. And some of my faculty who are finally seeing it is, I guess a positive of it. But it goes beyond that. So I didn't grow up through the 60s. I grew up through the 80s, but that's when, Thatcher and Reagan started privatizing everything, right? Maybe the times were so good there wasn't as much protest. I think what 2025 is getting us to see is something we didn't acknowledge that we should have acknowledged a long time ago. The idea of a university always needs to be defended. Just like the idea of democracy always needs to be defended. We tend to think, oh, it's kind of a natural thing that doesn't need our incursion to keep it going. I think we realized it does. And, from the neoliberal standpoint, coming back to that we actually see, and I know we're in the moment, but even independent of the moment, we had given up some things that we should have been fighting for continually. The idea that there is a public good. Do we actually want to go to the idea that there is no such thing as society? That is the extreme neoliberal view. Or are we willing to defend the idea that there is such a thing as public good and that it can exist with private good, that it can exist with students getting jobs, but that it is also something we need to actively defend. And again, it's 2020 hindsight, but I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I realized I had just sort of taken it for granted that the idea of a university, the idea of education, and, let's hopefully not be too hyperbolic, that the idea that that feeds into what we call a democracy is something all of us actively need to maintain. And if, 2025 has got us to see that, then hopefully 2026 gets us to take more action and actually actively defend these sort of things. The only thing I will add to Ruben's list of people we can engage is also alumni. So the alumni are people who perhaps can remember what things were in the past. At least at my university, they do have a strong say. So from the alumni side, but also to the student side, students coming in, I think we can actually educate a little bit more there as well and come back to this question that I think we always should have been asking. What is a university for?
Well, let me just follow up very briefly on my previous question. So, the bloody battle took place at Kent State University, which is neither Harvard nor Brown University nor Columbia, which are right now in the front line of assault by the government. The government is not focusing on the Kent states. It's not focusing on the Michigan states either. It's focusing on the Ivies and their equivalent. And I just wonder what the tactic and strategy is. This is new with the new Trump administration, and how it affects the students all around the country.
The Ivies, because they are the most highly recognized, respected, and most influential, if you will. And if you can take them, if you can make them toe the line, the other ones will fall in line, right? But I think students everywhere are being affected by what they're seeing. You know, students are not fools. They are very intelligent young people who are very concerned about their future. The ones that have been engaged in protests completely understand that the nation is moving in the wrong direction and that something needs to be done. And speaking to what Adrian just said about society, you know, back in, I think it was the 60s, Foucault actually wrote a book defending society. And, you know, that was highly visionary to think that we would arrive at a point where we would be told by political leaders that there are no social structures, that there is no society, that there are just individuals. And so part of that, with neoliberal ideology being embedded in the minds of a lot of Americans, that's another barrier that we have to deal with and we have to help them understand. But the conditions are vastly helping out at this point because nobody, you know, no, everybody seems to have a sense of fairness. You know, these little 3-year-olds will tell you, hey, it's not fair, and 80-year-olds will tell you it's not fair, and everybody is recognizing that what is happening is not fair, and so hopefully we can be able to build on that.
The commentary in the Atlantic that David Brooks wrote, and he does a good job, I think, particularly for a public audience, of being able to talk about what kind of leadership is required in an environment in which we speak. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm reading between the lines, and maybe not so much, but I don't want to put obviously words in his mouth, is that the leadership we have institutionally and with professional organizations is not built for the circumstances we have today. I think that one of the things that we need to continue doing is to do anything we can to encourage that new generation, going back to John F. Kennedy's comments, the new generation of leadership that is required today. We don't necessarily have that yet. But the point is, we're going to need that. Now, what's the best way to do it? My own opinion is, I think leadership within higher education is going to be too few and too weak. The best approach is to engage as actively as we can to get local officials, state officials, and national officials elected to office that will back away from these the fascist positions, because they will be able to dismantle the approach that we're taking on now. We have not seen the kind of approach that the current administration is taking nationally and internationally. Now, it's easy to say we need to go back to the way it was, But what I'm saying is we need to go back to the way it was. And the current people who hold the levers of power and the majority need to be unseated. And I think, and that's one of the things that I'm engaged with. And I think that's one of the things that all of us can do. And I'm also saying that I think trying to hope for change in the sector coming from leadership in the sector of higher education, if it happens, I'll be shocked.
I hate to say it, but I agree with you, Frank. I think the only thing I wanted to add to Ruben, I think one of the other reasons they're going after the Ivies, because in principle, the Ivies have the financial resources to withstand it. So if you take them down, right, just from a financial perspective, it'll be easier to knock the others down. For that reason, I hope they do stand up. They're in the position to do that. And I guess that comes back to, a comment about boards of trustees being willing to step up. Now, will they be able to institute a national change? No, I mean, I agree with Frank, right? This has to start locally. But since all of us are educators in the university system, if we actually do engage locally in our own local politics, at least we have something to say, right? We've been there, we've seen it, so we can actually add that. And those are kind of the small things that I think are within the reach of an individual.
So I want to go back to earlier in the conversation, or way earlier in the conversation, where Adrian mentioned that people who are getting grants are supposed to, make a profit nowadays. The researcher is a entrepreneur. And go back to what I take to be the beginnings of the modern university and the modern education system, where the university was not just simply training priests and or other kinds of professional people, to the area of the French Revolution and Napoleon and égalité, liberté, fraternité. And the French were the first to establish a National Academy of Sciences. This is a government-sponsored research institute for scientists. And the French universities had nothing to do with research and everything to do with teaching. And the National Academy of Sciences had everything to do with research and nothing to do with teaching. That model is in more or less every European country and most other countries in the world also. And America is unique, is that it has no functioning Academy of Sciences, and the universities in their totality work as the National Academy. And I wonder how and in what way that uniqueness of the American university system is affecting the present crises of the universities as we see a present crisis.
I could speak on this for a long, long time. I will try to be as brief as I can. View of the Humboldtian University, which actually was a German tradition, right? So the idea that you had scholars and researchers who were active in their field also doing the teaching, I do hold to that. One of my worries about the neoliberal view coming in to the research side, right, is if you say everything has to have market value, you are almost by definition squelching innovation. How do I innovate something that there is no market for? Right? It's this paradox of the neoliberal view, right? And that is a huge worry. So the university system in the US from the research side was functioning, I think, fairly well. I mean, it had to have taxpayer dollars, so this is something we need to convince the public of. But we can, right? Everybody's very interested in this idea of innovation. We can actually say, right, the true way to do innovation still is to actually have a lot of this knowledge be open. Now, I've worked with people who work with pharmaceuticals and things like that, and who work with companies. What they have valued for a long time is universities going through some experiments from the research side, finding out what doesn't work, what's not marketable, making that available to all the companies so they can have it, and then they can actually use it as they see fit. If we take that out of the equation, we're going to lose something that I think we can actually maybe galvanize the right and the left around, what we call American innovation, right? And if we lose that, we have lost a lot, right? And that is a big worry from the sciences side. Now, how you fund it, whether we're being efficient in the funding, of course, we're open to discussions about that. Everybody is. We can always do it better, right? What percentage of grants do you take? But the real question is, and this is the one to pose to the public, do you want to remove this altogether? Right? Because if you do, well, the American advantage and innovation and keeping up is actually going to take a big hit. And that is one of the, kind of big worry points when we went into this economic view of a neoliberal view that everything is marketable, that you're actually killing out true innovation in the sciences, in engineering, and, we can extend it further out. You also open up what Frank talked about. You open up capture, you open up corporate capture, you that's also going to squelch things out. It's actually not going to allow for the clever young people to come in who have scientific ideas, who aren't interested in market competition. So, that's my 2 cents there.
We have a differentiated system of higher education. And while some may look to the Ivies as the model to follow, a lot of them are not research based. And I was pleased to see that the AAUP published an op-ed the other day by a faculty member, I think teaching English literature or something in Southwest Missouri, who wrote about how important it is for us to resume and take back our role as professors to actually profess, right? We should be professing by telling the truth and so forth. And so we should keep in mind that while our colleagues in the research universities may have their nose at the grindstone trying to bring in money and all that stuff, a lot of faculty across the country, probably the majority, are not in these institutions, and they value teaching and professing uh, as much as anybody else. They also, I think, because it's a differentiated system, they may have a little more freedom to be able to profess. And so, there's no accident that Kent State was targeted, right? Because it's not a major research university, but the students there were concerned and they were rising up, and we can see this someplace else. If the Ivies do not provide leadership, and during the 60s, a lot of these institutions, there's this view that certain institutions led the resistance. Uh, Actually, MSU was one of the ones that was very, very much at the forefront, but never really was seen as being part of that leadership and so on. So it's going to be happening all across the country. The crisis is so great that more and more people are going to be standing up, and it'll give us the opportunity to use a phrase that was used by the last administration. We're not going back. We're going to build back better.
And they say, well, that probably isn't going to contribute much, or that's not something I would do. My response always is do something. Just do something. Do what you believe is what is your passion that is going to contribute to the same end that we all share, but do something rather than criticizing other people in terms of what they're doing.
Well, you sparked an idea in my mind when you were speaking, and that is a quote from Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in a little container on an island. Uh, he said, "It seems impossible until it's done."
Yeah, what I can echo is, and I'm not backpatting and I'm not trying to when I found FutureU and other organizations, it just became an avenue to do something. And even if it was something that made me feel better about myself a little bit, that's okay. At least I felt like I could do a little bit, right? And so the more things we can find like that, the better. But that does, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's been 10 years. What do you guys see for the next 10 years? I mean, that's hard to project, but where would you like to see it go forward?
Well, I think the forum can serve as an organizing tool by promoting awareness, by distributing information, doing what it continues to do. There will be more interest. The context is one where there will be more interest. And so we may shift away from uh, a complete focus on higher education because it's the broader context that needs attention. We cannot fix higher education if we don't address the broader issue. And so we may have to shift to the broader issue, which I think is evident here in our conversation today. We're going to have to deal with how to address authoritarianism and to also spark dialogues about what kind of society we want and what kind of economy we want, because we can't continue with the old model. It's a new day, and this transition, I think, is going to be a great opportunity to propel humanity forward.
Well, I just have to agree with Frank. Let's each of us think of something positive we can do in the next few minutes.
And this is what I've decided to do, Joe, is that it's easy when we're having a conversation among ourselves who are of higher education. But so many of our colleagues, friends, are not in higher education. So one of the things that I've tried to do, and that's through the activism role that I play, is to share with the general public what is happening inside higher education. That's a very tough sell for some to even begin to absorb and digest what is happening. For example, and Ruben and I have talked about this, the incredibly destructive approach that's being taken in some states, Florida and Ohio are two that come to mind. And I would also put Indiana in that list. Uh, for people to understand what is at risk if the efforts that are already being done expand and enlarge in terms of the education their sons and daughters will get, the research that will be coming out of these schools, the outreach that will get done or won't get done because, for example, uh, this is a group that should not get special attention. So therefore, the outreach program that we offered will stop. In fact, at Ohio State, they are no longer funding faculty to attend conferences that are in any way, shape, or form associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's how serious it has gotten. So that basically says there's certain work that can be done, certain work that can't be done because we, the regime, determine it to be worthy work or work that shouldn't be done. And so that's one thing I think all academics can do. And you can do that by writing letters to the editor. You can make presentations at your local library. You can use social media for that. And you don't have to associate yourself with an institution. You can speak as a faculty member.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Frank, because it kind of echoes something I've been thinking about too. I and many of us have been interested in outreach, and a lot of my outreach was, science education and things like that. I've decided maybe it's time for me to redefine what I mean by outreach, right? That I can still go out and educate about science, but I can also talk about how the process of science is done, how we as a society decide to fund it or decide not to fund it, right? And leave it open, right? I'm not going to tell people what to do, but just to give that education. Speaking personally, for a time, I realized I was kind of reticent about talking to my friends about the fact that I'm in higher education or a professor. For whatever reason, I thought it might sound snobby or something like that. Now I've kind of done it a little bit more. People know, and they're sending their kids to school. And I have friends who are on the right side of politics and on the left side of politics. And I've just become a little bit more open to talking to them about how higher education works, changes I've seen, things they might be interested in. And I guess this comes back to what Frank was saying in some ways. At the end of the day, right, parents care about their kids, right? And that's really something I've come to appreciate, that I can actually tell them, okay, this is how the education side works. And I can at least give you that information and be a little less reticent about being willing to talk about that in public.
Yeah, the things that Frank said, I've been doing most of my career. So I guess I'm not going to change a whole lot. I'll just change the content. Thank you, Joe, for joining us today and for serving as our moderator. I think it's a great conversation. I want to thank Adrian as well for taking time to join us and looking forward to further conversations. And Frank, as usual, we'll continue this as long as we can.